Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Greetings, everyone. You are at Attitude Magazine. Today's guest is Ari Tuckman, Doctor of Psychology and MBA, author of More Attention, Less Deficit, and Understanding Your Brain and Getting More Done. Dr. Tuckman speaks frequently about ADHD at CHAD. He writes frequently for Attitude Magazine, and we're very pleased to have him today. His practice is in Westchester, Pennsylvania, and he works with adults and adolescents. Dr. Tuckman is going to talk about what he calls time-blindness today and give strategies for all of us with ADHD to become more aware of time. So with that, let me turn it over to Dr. Tuckman. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Sure, it's my pleasure. I'm always happy to do these presentations, and especially I'm interested in this particular topic, this idea of time blindness, as it's sometimes called, of being aware of time, managing time, predicting time. We're going to talk about all of this stuff because obviously time is an important, being aware of time and using it well is an important key to success in life, whether you're 10 years old in school or 50 years old in the workplace. So let's just talk about, to begin with, kind of what is this idea of the sense of time. So the sense of time is one of the executive functions, and the executive functions get kind of talked about a lot in the world of ADHD as well as in a few other worlds. But the sense of time, or executive functions, are some of our highest level cognitive processes that we use to alter our own behavior. So we direct them towards ourselves in order to create a better future for ourselves. So we're not simply reacting to what's most interesting moment by moment by moment, but the executive functions allow us to kind of look at the bigger picture a little bit and do the things that are going to be best for us in the long run. So the sense of time is one of those executive functions. And it involves the ability to be aware of, what time is it now at this moment, as well as looking backwards and to see how much time has elapsed. So how long have I been doing this thing that I'm doing now, as well as to look forward into time and to be able to predict, how long will this take? Here I am doing this now. How long will this take? How long will the next thing take? So, here I am making breakfast. How long until it's going to be done? How long does it take us to eat it? I need to make lunch before I leave. How long is that going to take? Okay, I need to do this, but what else might pop up? So being able to run through different scenarios in relation to time and make good predictions about that. So generally speaking, this thing we call time management, which we all use very kind of informally, good time management is based on the ability to be aware of time. And the reason is you can't manage what you aren't first aware of. So if you're not aware of it, there's a whole lot less then to manage. So when it comes to then being aware of time, Russell Barkley has this great line where he says that folks with ADHD struggle from time blindness. So the idea is that they just don't see time as effectively as people without ADHD. They're not as aware of that ticking of time and how long has it been and how long is it going to take me to do the next thing. So as a result, they tend to run into trouble more when it comes to managing time effectively. Because folks with ADHD tend to not see time as effectively, as a result, they then don't plan their activities as effectively in relation to time. So they may spend too long on this and not leave enough time for that. Or they may underestimate how long things are going to take so that they wind up getting crunched for time, not finishing what they're supposed to, running over deadlines, running late to meet someone, things like that. So, there's a lot of opportunities to get ourselves into trouble when it comes to managing time. Opportunity might not be the way you look at it, but there's a lot of ways to kind of get ourselves into trouble there. So when it comes to understanding time management, an important concept is something called the time horizon. So time horizon is basically how far out into the future do you look when you plan your activities. So if you're a small kid, if you're a young child, you're probably not looking really much past the next hour or so. So what's going to happen tomorrow doesn't really factor into your thinking all that often. But the older that we get, the longer our time horizon becomes. So, when you're an adult, you can begin to think about things like not only what am I doing today and this weekend, but what am I doing next year? Or, we have some expenses coming up at the end of the year. I should start to put money away now. Or I should, I'd like to get a new computer, but instead I'm going to hold off because I've got other things that I need to pay for it down the road. So our time horizon gets longer. We begin to think further down the road and factor those things, that information, into the choices that we make here in this one present moment. Now, folks with ADHD, as it turns out, often tend to have a shorter time horizon, meaning that they don't think as far into the future when deciding what to do. So, with this example of buying a new computer, someone with ADHD may look and say, well, you know what, I've got the money for a computer, I think I'm just going to buy one, without considering the fact that, you do have the money today, but a few months from now, you've got some big expenses coming up, and it's going to be nice to have that, $800 or whatever it is that you might spend on a computer today. So they make choices in the moment that then later wind up kind of burning them. This then has implications not only for kind of practical matters like, what does your checking account balance look like at the end of the year, or, are you working on that paper, that term paper that's due in 2 months, but it also has social implications because other people look at what we do and they make judgments of it. And, we all do this. So sometimes we make positive judgments as in, oh, that's great, I'm glad that person did that. And sometimes we make negative judgments where we say, oh man, that was really sort of stupid, or that was silly, or that was irresponsible, or I wouldn't have done that, or what's wrong with them. So we can get very kind of judgmental in our judgments. Specifically here, when it comes to time awareness in ADHD, some folks will look at it as this is a matter of kind of how responsible someone is. That, if you miss a deadline because you didn't plan your time well, some people are going to look at it and say, that you were being irresponsible. So that it's a matter of responsibility and even, God help us here, morality rather than ability. And, this is where it gets kind of messy a little bit, or it gets a little kind of subtle here. But that, like we talked about, if you're not aware of time as effectively, that will have big implications for your ability to manage time. So if other people assume that it's really assume that you have the ability but you're choosing not to use it, they will then get moralistic about it, which is why a diagnosis of ADHD can be helpful, which is why understanding your ADHD beyond just the obvious, but understanding these important nuances can be so important, because the deadline perhaps would still get missed, but how it got missed might change, and that's important. Or people might, or knowing that you're not as aware of time, you might use different strategies to become more aware of it so you can then manage it more effectively. And that's what we're going to be talking about here, is sort of ways to manage time more effectively, most of which involves becoming more aware of time.
This is, the images that people have written in response to this topic are just fascinating. I'll just read a couple of them. The way people are talking about how they feel about time almost palpably. So one person says, I always feel that there's an infinite amount of time until there isn't. And another one says, during my free time, it's as if there's a black hole of time, just an infinite amount that I'm aware of its ending. And then a third person says something wonderful. She wrote, he or she, I'm not sure. She said, it's usually as if time is a bowl of beads, and I just scoop up a handful of loose beads whenever I need some. But at one point she was on medication, and she said during that time it was as if time went in order, as if all those beads were on a string in an orderly fashion. So, I mean, before we get to the meat of this, which I think is tips to help people manage time, can you talk a little bit about what do we suppose, or what do scientists think is going on with this so dramatically different perception of time, and tangibly how time is in the world around those of us with ADHD?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, I love those examples that you gave, and they really are, they're very visual. I think all of them have this great kind of visual quality to them that you can really sort of picture what the person is talking about. But I think that, kind of where this comes from is that the ability to be aware of time requires the ability to step back and out of our current immediate situation. That, and kind of like, maybe the clearest example of this is if you're hyper-focused in on something, or anybody, ADHD or not, if anyone is really sort of highly absorbed into something, part of what happens is that time kind of disappears, because we're so consumed into the thing that we're doing. So the more consumed we are into the present moment, the less kind of distance and perspective we have on moments past, as well as that time and space to consider moments into the future. So what happens for a lot of folks, or one of the sort of fundamental things about ADHD is that folks with ADHD tend to have, compared to people without ADHD, a harder time kind of breaking away from the present moment, that they're more driven by what's happening in this moment, what's going on around them, as well as what's going on inside their heads. So folks with ADHD, therefore, less often will kind of step themselves back from the situation so that they can kind of think about it, consider their options, kind of bring their knowledge and wisdom forward into the decisions they're making in this moment. So, which is kind of brings us to that, again, Russell Barkley has a line where he says, ADHD is not a disorder of knowing what to do. It's a disorder of doing what you know. So, so people with ADHD know I should be on time to things. If anything, people with ADHD know that better than people without ADHD, because people with ADHD have been told a million times you should be on time to things, and they've been told every reason why it's bad when they're late for things, So if anything, folks with ADHD have far more experience on this topic than people without ADHD. But that's the key, is knowing it does not translate reliably enough into doing it. So when we talk about strategies to manage time better, it really comes back to first of all, being more aware of time. And a lot of those strategies, just simple stuff like set an alarm. What they do is they make you aware of time. They break into your consciousness, into your attention, and they make time stand out a little bit more. It is now, 7:30, time to start getting ready. As opposed to without the alarm, 7:30 would kind of come and then go, and it's only at some point later that you pick your head up and go, oh, I wonder what time it is. Oh my God, it's 7:40, I'm late. So a lot of the strategies involve kind of breaking into awareness and making time stand out a little bit better.
In terms of that, sticking just for a moment with that idea of making time stand out, a significant number of people on the webinar have posted things along these lines. When I'm in one task, I completely lose track of time. Or when I start doing something, 3 hours can go by without my being aware of time passing.
Right.
What are some strategies that can be used for that question of being aware of the passage of time during a specific task?
Right. Yeah, and I think, first of all, I think it's important to recognize that there are some tasks that are probably more likely to fully absorb your attention, whether it's kind of a hyper-focus or not. But some tasks just inherently hold our attention more than others. So typically those are things that are personally interesting or, it's kind of the pressure is on and like the deadline and, you sort of get yourself up and going on and you're like locked in on it. So I think it's helpful to know what activities do you tend to get stuck in and lose time in, because that way you're not sort of on guard every moment of every day, but you can sort of know for these kind of activities, I tend to get lost. So, there are some things where it's helpful just not to start them in the first place. So, I had a client, this was years ago at this point, but he would listen to NPR in the morning, and there were all these really interesting stories on the radio, and then he would start looking stuff up, and he'd start writing out notes, and he would just lose time. And it just became this thing where it's like, if you want to get to work on time, listening to NPR is too likely to cause you to be late. Not every single time, but, enough times that, it's kind of, he got stuck in it. So one of the things that we talked about was, don't put on the radio until you get into your car. So don't listen to the radio while you're at home. Or whatever else, or checking email, getting online, checking Facebook. There are certain things that are just too easy to get lost in. Or reading, jumping into a good book or something. If you have a short amount of time, it is better not to get into those activities in the first place.
Okay. So be aware of those activities. I mean, one person here has posted that when she's shopping, she'll think she's been in the store for half an hour, and when she looks at her watch, it's been 3 hours.
Right.
So there would be an example of someone who knows that shopping is an activity that she might need to avoid if she's under a time pressure. Yeah.
Or alternatively, to set a quick countdown alarm on your phone or otherwise, so quick 30 minutes, and then the thing goes off. So what happens then is the alarm goes off and it makes you aware, oh, it has now been 30 minutes. Now, at that point, you have a choice to make. And the choice is to say, you know what, my plan was to only do 30 minutes. I got to get some other things done. I hate to do this, but I got to leave. I would like to stay, but I'm not going to. Or the choice is, you know what, I'm actually really kind of enjoying myself, or I'm finding some good stuff, or I realized within that half hour I actually need these 4 other things, so it's really better for me to stay. But at least a conscious choice is being made. As opposed to when we're absorbed in it and we lose track of time, there isn't really any choice being made because we're kind of like running down the funnel. There's no choice rolling down the funnel other than to kind of keep going. Yeah, so like setting these things that kind of break into our attention give us the opportunity to then make another choice in that moment.
So alarms, timers, things that would say stop for a moment and ask yourself whether you want to continue with this task or not.
Yeah, exactly. Or asking for a reminder from someone else.
Well, that's a good idea. Yeah, someone else does. Someone does mention that. It says alarms. I don't hear them. I ignore them. I wonder what the noise is. I forgot that I set the alarm. But one thing that does work for me is for a person to say to me, "It's time to leave now," and then wait until I actually go.
Right.
What else can I do? He says, other than have a person literally standing there to move me along.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have 2 thoughts here. So my first one is he does something very smart there, which is he asks the person to stay there until he actually does the thing. As opposed to what can sometimes happen is someone comes and says, hey, it's that time to go or to do something else or whatever. And you go, oh, okay, cool, thanks. Yeah, that sounds good. I'm just going to finish this up real quick. And then what happens? You kind of like, you get absorbed back into the activity, and the reminder kind of, was for naught. So it's, so I think it's better than to not have to keep the person there until you actually start doing the thing. Or another, a related suggestion is when the alarm goes off that you snooze it first, and then, you transition, and then when it goes off again, then you turn it off. But you don't just have the alarm go off and then turn it off and then go back to what you were doing, or do the, just 1 more minute thing. So you always snooze it until you're actually changing.
Okay. Well, Maria on the webinar just posted to say, well, clearly we all need personal assistance, which seems like a great suggestion. It's not something most of us are going to be able to do.
Yeah, I mean, if you can swing it,
in terms of setting those timers, what works for me is to set repeated timers. Timer 15 minutes before the event, 5 minutes before the event. I mean, it doesn't always work. I'm still often late, but I have a chance of minding the timer if I set multiple ones.
Well, exactly, because every one that you add multiplies the possibilities, and it's really all about, I mean, there's no guarantees in anything in life, so it's really more about, I kind of think about it as kind of tilting the odds, making it more likely that this will happen rather than that. And, one of the things is, particularly one of the challenges of smartphones, one of the sort of evils of smartphones, if we can be that dramatic about it, is that the damn things are going off all the time with all sorts of stuff. And some of it is important, like there's a tornado in your area, seek shelter. And some of it is stupid, like, Kim Kardashian did something or other or whatever, so I think it's important to, first of all, to minimize the number of pointless things that your phone is going off for, or the number of pointless things that are coming into your life and into your awareness. But then maybe also to set different alarms for different things. So if you just have a generic beep, like that could be anything, and maybe to have kind of like a certain sound for certain really important things and another sound for just kind of run-of-the-mill kind of stuff. So you make it stand out a little bit better.
Yeah, a number of people here have posted that they use songs for different events. Sort of set an alarm with a song and know that when the song ends, you need to do X or Y. So, and another person uses PBS, knowing that when a certain program ends, I better be leaving for work. So that's interesting. Using things around you also.
And that's great because it's already there. It means you don't need to finesse it. You don't need to finagle with it. It's already there. So to the extent that you can do that, that is really helpful.
Before we leave this topic, one last point from someone who says he finds himself almost in a fugue state. He knows that he has to leave to pick up his daughter, and yet he can't he's stuck. He knows he's becoming late, and he just can't move out of that state. Almost as if, it's almost paralysis.
Yeah, I mean, my thought on that is, I mean, first of all, I've certainly heard that kind of thing before, so he's in good company. But, I think it's a matter of then creating some sort of bigger and bolder alarms to kind of break into his awareness or to avoid certain things before these important transition times.
Okay.
So
transitions are something that many people are talking about the difficulties with. Yes, for the fugue state person, 5 people have just posted, yes, me too, I can relate to that. So you are not alone.
Right.
Another person, yes, I'm often in that frozen state where I can see the clock ticking, but I can't move. It's really fascinating for all of us.
Well, and maybe, maybe sort of the sub-strategy here is to set things up before you do the thing that you tend to get locked into. So if the thing is to go pick up your daughter, that, what you do is you load up your bag and you get your keys and everything and it's all set so that as soon as you do kind of break out and begin a transition, you just have to grab and go. So you don't need to sort of sit there and say, okay, all right, what do I need to take with me? What else do I have here? What do I got going on tonight at home? Blah, blah, blah. It's like you've already thought that through, so you don't have to do any of that stuff. And then your goal is to just stand up, pick it up, and walk out the door.
One of the things that people mention, and this is something that I personally suffer from enormously, is is how difficult it is to just go ahead and leave. In other words, this person puts it this way: I'm often in that frozen state. I'm just not at all motivated to start getting ready to go. And then when it's time for me to leave the house, that's when I start getting ready. And that's what I do. I sort of wait until the moment when I should have left or should even be there, and then I start moving. What is that? Is that what makes us? I mean, it doesn't take a rocket science to figure out that it's going to take a half an hour to get someplace, or 15 minutes to get ready.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of two things. I think that part of it is that the time of, it's one of those things where like I need to be there at 5, which really means I need to walk out the door at 4:30, and therefore I need to start getting ready at 4:15, let's say. I think that it's one of those things that 5 o'clock feels like the time that it is, but the time,
it is the time.
Yeah, the time is really 4:15.
Right.
So I think it's a matter of really sort of thinking about like 5 is not the number. The number is 4:15. And to really kind of try to break yourself of that habit. And, basically what you're doing is you're thinking about time more actively rather than kind of thinking about it a little more passively, which is, okay, I have to be there at 5, so 5 is the time. And really kind of think through let's work this back. If I got to be there at 5, that means I need to leave at 4:30. To leave at 4:30, that means I start getting ready at 4:15 or whatever.
Right.
So, and to be very kind of specific and conscious about that, and to put it into your schedule. So like when you put in your schedule, meeting 5 o'clock, you actually draw it backwards. Like I use a paper schedule, so I draw a line, up earlier into time, and I'll circle 4:15 because that's the real time to leave.
Right.
Or to put it into if you do it electronically, to either put it as 4:15 in your schedule, but then it says 5 o'clock meet, John or something.
Right.
Or to say, 4:15 to 4:30, get ready, 4:30 to 5, travel, 5 o'clock, meet John.
Okay.
But that it has to be there and it has to be visible. You have to see it, because if you see it,
it
feels more real.
Right. Here are a number of people, and I confess that this is one of my strategies as well, folks, who set the clock ahead, set the clock 13 minutes fast. So the shock value of the time hits sooner, someone says. It's a great phrase. I guess, you think to yourself that if you set the clock ahead, you'll start to make accommodations for that and be even more late, but it does somehow work to get you moving earlier, I think.
Well, I think that sometimes what can help also is having analog clocks, like old-fashioned clocks with hands that move, rather than having digital clocks, which
definitely,
it doesn't feel as, I don't know, there's something about looking at a hand and seeing like, oh, there's a lot of space, oh, there's a lot less space between the minute hand and the 12 or whatever. So sometimes I think that can be helpful. I think it helps also just in general to have a bunch of clocks in your environment. Mary Salanto, who's written, a bunch of articles and a book on ADHD, kind of talks about, one of her suggestions is wear an actual watch.
Definitely.
Because there's something, and this is only a matter of seconds, but sometimes seconds make a difference, that to just twist your wrist a little bit so you can see your watch is easier and quicker to do, and therefore you're more likely to do it. As opposed to pulling a cell phone out of your pocket, takes a little bit more time. It's a little bit more obtrusive, as opposed to just glancing at your watch is a little less obtrusive. So you're more likely to check the time.
Yes. Well, someone actually posted here on the webinar, quote, I need to use analog clocks. Digital clocks are too abstract, and I have a better sense of time passing when I see the hands of the clock move, which is really fascinating. On the question of time management, here's an interesting a problem from someone who also has dyscalculia, impairs her ability to sense and predict time. The ADD impairs her ability to sense and predict time, but she also has a problem adding and subtracting time incorrectly. So, for example, she says, I recently told someone that I would leave at 7:15 in order to make a 7 p.m. flight in the apparent sincere belief that I'd invented time travel. Fortunately, they corrected me.
Right.
So these our people, as usual, have a great sense of humor about what we're going through. So she'd love to hear any ideas for those about whether those two disorders can be related, and any suggestions for dealing with sort of both the difficulty of calculating backwards and also moving out at time.
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, if you have difficulty with math and calculations and things like that, then definitely it's going to make this a little bit harder. But I think that, some recommendations I would make would be to try to do more of this on paper, so to speak, rather than in your head, because I think, we're all more prone to making mistakes in our head, to not do it on the fly. So in other words, while you're doing one other thing, to think about, all right, let's see, 7 o'clock, when do I need to leave in order to get there? In which case you're only giving it partial attention while you're doing something else, but to be very kind of intentional about it, meaning like, okay, here we go, 7 o'clock flight, let's think about this. When do I need to leave? How much, it's 7 o'clock, how much traffic is there at 7? So, not, do what's called best case scenario planning, which a lot of folks with ADHD tend to do, which is under ideal circumstances, how long would it take? So if I had a midnight flight, how long would it take me to get to the airport? Let's say half an hour. But, 7 p.m. flight, middle of rush hour, it does not take you a half hour to get to the airport in the middle of rush hour. It takes you like an hour. So to really kind of think about it very specifically, and to use big round numbers and to round up rather than down if it's something really important, like a flight,
Yeah.
So like, let's see, getting to the airport could be, 45 minutes to an hour. All right, let's go with an hour. In this case, we're going with an hour. So let's use 1 hour. So with big round numbers, I think you're less likely to make math errors. Or to, like kind of write it out. Like, let's say, got to do this. This is going to take this long. This will take this long. This will take this long. Let's kind of do the math here and do it very slowly and deliberately and really kind of take that time rather than kind of rushing it, because we're all more likely to make mistakes when we rush it.
Right. Joe just posted, I'm addicted to the best case scenario. I think we all are, Joe. People are posting some suggestions, and maybe I'll ask for your thoughts on specific tools, apps, or systems that help people manage time. Some people have pointed out that the time timer clock, which literally shows time ticking down with a red line, is useful. Wondering if you have other suggestions for apps or tools or even systems such as getting things done, famous system for managing time.
Yeah. I think, time timer is great. And there's even, there's like the real kind of hands-on version of it. That's an actual clock-like thing. But I think there's also an app at this point that that you can use as well. So, and what's good about it is that it's visual. Like, you see that, there's a certain amount of, you turn the dial and there's a certain amount of red, and you see that red disappear. And as it gets smaller and smaller, it makes time feel more tangible. So, that's definitely one option. I think anything that you can set alarms for is really good. Or even just setting like 15-minute repeats, so, on the 15 of the hour, it gives one beep. On the 30, it gives another. On the 45, it gives another. And then on the hour, it gives another. So you hear that little beep in it, or the vibe or whatever, and it makes you aware, okay, that's been 15, that's been 15.
Interesting.
Yeah. I had a client who really liked something called Activity Timer, which is an app that you set how much time you have, no matter how much. Let's say it's 43 minutes, so weird random time. It will break it into thirds. And 1/3 of the way through, it'll give you an alarm. 2/3 of the way through, it'll give you an alarm. And then, as you come up on the real time. So it breaks it into thirds, so you don't have to do that weird mental math of, what's a third of 43 minutes or a third of 17 minutes or whatever.
And what's the name of that app? It sounds great.
It's called Activity Timer.
Activity Timer, okay.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah. But, in general, when it comes to apps, my advice is sometimes less is more. That sometimes something that's a little bit, that is perhaps fewer functions, but they're actually functions that you use.
Right.
And it's definitely worth, sometimes paying for ease of use that, just human nature, the more cumbersome something is, the less likely you are to use it. And the less you use it, the less helpful it can be.
Right. No, definitely simple is better. Melanie writes in and she says, I'm the person who invented time travel. She uses an app called Break Time that she wanted to point out for her iPhone that works really well for scheduling her workday. So we'll pull together, folks, a list of the apps and the suggestions. Another one that's been mentioned here is called Stay on Task. I don't know if you've heard of that, Dr. Tuckman.
I haven't.
So I suspect that it's probably whatever works best for you.
Yeah.
Paula uses the kitchen timer. Just beeps one sound 10 minutes before the end and a different sound 5 minutes before the end, and then louder and persistent when the time is up. Sounds like a great kitchen timer. Yeah. So it's a good one. Do you have a suggestion on a time management system? I guess it's so personal, isn't it?
Yeah, it's hard to pick just one. So, I think it's a matter of figuring out what is it that works for you, partially based on, how do you process time and what sort of cues do you respond better to. But it really also depends on what are the demands in your life and what are the demands in your schedule. And are you in one place or are you kind of running around a lot of different places? So like for me, I tend to be in my office, so it's fine for me to have this big fat schedule book because I'm not walking around with it in my pocket, Now, if I was an electrician or a plumber or something and I'm out running around all over the place, I probably wouldn't want to have a scheduled book. I would rather have something on my phone, let's say. So, you want to find the thing that fits for you. And then there's that balancing act between tweaking and, I can make this a little better, I could do that a little better, and, here's a new system, and this looks really exciting and interesting, and that kind of, so versus, so tweaking too much versus staying stuck with something that isn't really doing the job. And I think that there's a tendency, if I was going to pick one or the other for folks with ADHD, I think that the tendency is to seek novelty, because new is more interesting, and kind of always finding some new system. So then what you're doing is you're screwing around with systems rather than actually using them to get things done.
Right. Yeah. You're amusing yourself with cool techie toys, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's great fun.
Yeah. Two other apps, I'll just throw these out there that people have proposed that sound really interesting. One's called Cool Timer, and it has an alarm clock wearing shades as its icon. So, and one called 3030, which apparently from the description sort of has as a principle work for 30 minutes and then take a break, which seems, like a pretty good idea if you can manage that. So that's another suggestion. It's an app, 30-30. So getting up in the morning, a number of people have talked about, especially with children, that they have a really tough time getting their kids to get up in the morning. And others, similarly, at night, say they know it's time to go to bed, but they're busily doing something and they just can't seem to make the transition. Right. Any thoughts on those two sticky times of the day?
Sure. Yeah, this is a 10-hour presentation all by itself, I think.
I know.
But I think I have a saying that a lot of morning problems are really night problems. That when it comes to getting up and going in the morning, often the problem is that the person went to bed too late. Now, some of that may be that if you're just not a morning person, then it doesn't matter if you got 15 hours of sleep. The morning is still maybe not your best time. So if that's the case, then that is just unfortunate, unless you're able to shift your schedule so you can do stuff later. But, part of this is that it does seem like folks with ADHD tend to be night owls more often than folks without ADHD. So, to get into bed at 10 o'clock so you can wake up at 6 o'clock, your body is it's just not primed to be tired at 10, as opposed to someone who's a morning person who is more than happy to get into bed at 10 o'clock. So, so some of that is you're fighting uphill. That if you're not a morning person, it's going to be harder to get yourself to wind down. Now, part of it, though, can also be that if you haven't managed your time well through the course of the day or the evening, you still have too much to do, and that's why you can't get yourself into bed on time. So that's kind of unintentionally staying up late. Sometimes unintentionally staying up late involves getting caught up in something interesting, and then you inadvertently miss your bedtime, but you're not necessarily trying to or intentionally deciding to. So you get hyper-focused on something fun, and then you look at the clock and you're like, oh, man, I can't believe it's been 2 hours. Sometimes, though, it is a more intentional kind of thing of I'm enjoying this, and I don't want to stop it. So, whether it comes in big chunks or in small chunks, big chunks is, forget it, I'm not going to bed at 10, I'm going to start a movie now. But it can also come in small chunks of like, well, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, and then, it adds up to a whole lot of time. But, I have to say that getting enough sleep is extremely important. I know it's incredibly boring, but it is important. In that you're not going to function as well the next day if you're not getting enough sleep. So, there's an unfortunate kind of double whammy there, which is getting into bed on time and getting enough sleep assumes that you've managed your day well, you have a good sense of time, you have the ability to shut your brain off and wind down when you do get into bed. Folks with ADHD are going to have a harder time with that, and yet they need that good sleep just like everybody else does.
Okay. There's a couple of comments on here that talk about something that I really identify with, and they're saying, do we have to see ADHD attitudes toward time as a problem? In some ways, people say, I perform best under stress. I like waiting till the last minute. I don't want to get there early and be bored. So there's some sort of notion, I think, here, and I certainly identify with this, that, we behave in this way about time, last minute lateness, almost by preference, because it suits us. What are your thoughts on that? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's one of those things that everybody does more of the things that come naturally. Mm-hmm. So if you're naturally very aware of time, it's easy to do in terms of an effort perspective. And then it's easy to get yourself to do it from more of a kind of, let's say, psychological perspective, because you're good at it and it tends to work out well. So something that we're not inherently as good at, we're going to tend to avoid a little bit more because it's not as easy, it's not as enjoyable, we don't feel as good about it. We don't feel as effective, and therefore we don't feel as good about it. And I think that, that's kind of what this person is talking about. As for whether, I don't know, I mean, you can certainly take the perspective here that whether something is a problem or not depends on what the demands are in your life.
Right.
So if you have a job or a spouse or something that, requires a really strict adherence to deadlines, not being good at time is going to be a problem.
Right.
On the other hand, if your job is a little bit looser and your, romantic partner or your friends or whatever are also a little bit looser about that, then it's really not a problem. It's kind of like being 5 feet tall for a guy isn't a problem unless you're, in the NBA or something. And that would be a problem. But if you're not in the NBA,
right.
So
to your point, there are a number of people here. There's someone here who says she simply cannot get herself to work on time. That once she's at work, she sounds as if she's a nurse, that she's performs at an extremely high level, caring for patients, ICU patients, but because there are constant deadlines, reminders, and staff to take care of cleaning and cooking and things that aren't fun, but she simply cannot get there on time. She always has a new delay getting out the door. And she's been told before that this is a real problem at the workplace. Her coworkers are resentful of her lateness, and she's changed jobs, but it still has the lateness issue, and it's almost this just inability to move out the door. That and someone else said also, I am always 10 minutes late, no matter what I do.
Right.
So,
well, and I think on the one hand, it may be easier to not sort of fight uphill and to try to find a job that is otherwise also a good fit, but is a little bit looser on the arrival time. Now that may or may not be possible, but I am all in favor of setting things up to make it more easy right from the get-go.
Right. Yeah, makes sense.
And also for in terms of friends, to just really kind of be upfront and say, look, I am terrible about getting places on time. I rarely do. This has been a lifelong problem. It happens with everybody and everything. It's not just you. I know your time is important. It is important to me as well. I don't want to keep you waiting, but I'm just saying I am rarely on time. So,
just come right out up front, be up front with it.
Yeah, because otherwise, if it's sort of like you could sort of say, oh well, I don't want to tell people that, but where's the secret in that? This is like the worst secret ever because they're going to figure it out on their own anyway. It's not like you're telling them something they won't otherwise know.
Right.
And what happens when you let other people come to their own conclusions is sometimes they come to the wrong conclusions, which could be something like, man, she's really full of herself that, her time is more important than mine, or she's a bad friend because she doesn't care about people, or whatever, which, if that's incorrect, don't let other people come to their own conclusions.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Can we talk for a minute about longer-term projects? We've talked a lot about daily timeliness. But folks are raising issues about managing long-term projects and planning for the future, which is also, I think, extremely difficult for us ADD folks. Do you have any thoughts on long-term planning and project management?
Yeah, definitely. I think the first thing here is to just recognize the fact that longer-term projects are going to be harder to sort of mentally wrap your head around and harder to make yourself get up and going on it. So just know that right off the bat. So that's okay. That's fine. But if you know it, then it's much easier to do something about it. So if you know that that's the case, then it means that you need to take some different approaches to it, that it may not come as kind of automatic naturally, and therefore it needs to be more sort of explicit and intentional. So an example here would be it's that kind of classical thing where you take a long-term project and you break it into smaller pieces in a very intentional sort of way of like, okay, for this big thing to be done by this far off date, let's see, this needs to be done by here, this needs to be done by here, this needs to be done by here, this needs to be done by here. There, each of these is its own piece, and each of these is a real deadline. That it's like that leaving at 4:15. It's kind of like you can't think of December 31st as the deadline. Like the deadline now is August 15th. This needs to happen. Then by November 15th, this needs to happen. And these are real deadlines, and I need to really kind of honor them and make myself do it. And then you put it into your schedule because if it isn't in your schedule, it probably doesn't exist because it's not, in your thoughts and awareness. Maybe to make some kind of external commitments to other people, a little social pressure can be a good thing sometimes. So to kind of talk to other people and say, whether it's at home or at work, whatever, but to say, I'm trying to get this done. Here's my deadline. Do me a favor. Ask me about it. Or a coach or a therapist or a friend or, someone else who can, be effective at providing some of that external accountability.
So breaking up this project into small pieces, each with its own deadline, and then getting some help in terms of meeting those deadlines, whether that be a friend, a coach, something, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this maybe even to schedule in time to do it. Because, if the time isn't there, it might just get kind of squeezed out, not intentionally, but it's just kind of like there's never any time. So I'll sometimes recommend to people that they take items from their to-do list and they put it into their calendar. Because the thing about to-do lists tend to be kind of time non-specific. Mm-hmm. I need to do this, I need to do that. Okay, great. When? Does that need to have any specific time, or just at some point between here and death, you will do these things on your list?
Right.
As opposed to, Thursday from 3 to 4, I'm going to work on these slides, or I'm going to make that phone call, or I'm going to, file those papers or whatever. So to put it into your schedule greatly increases the odds of it actually getting done.
What's your thinking on that? I mean, scheduling things, it seems counterintuitive for people with attention deficit disorder, and a lot of people have said that when they do schedule, it gives them more stress. But I know that the Fly Lady, whose system I think is very effective, is a key part of it is certain days have certain activities. So you always go shopping on Thursday morning. You always meal plan on Wednesday. You always do laundry this day. And she's a firm believer that establishing those patterns takes the decision-making out of it. What's your thought on that? Do you agree? And then people with ADHD that...
I mean, I think that if you have a hard time making decisions, then I think that having that kind of a preset pattern is probably really helpful because you just get in the groove and go.
Right. So you get up in the morning, you know that today's whatever day, and that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that there can be some value in that. Now, I think the flip side of it is that you can feel like you're in jail.
Right, exactly.
I don't want to go to the grocery store today. This is the day.
Right.
And I don't know. Like on the one hand, my thought is, look, just bite the bullet and get it done. And sometimes once you start it, you roll with it and it ain't so bad. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, my feeling is if you set this and you really give it an honest effort and you try it and it never sinks in, it never feels natural, then maybe that's the time to say, you know what, this is a lovely system for somebody else. I hate this. This is not working. Bottom line, it's not getting the job done. It's not working.
Right.
And if that's the case, fine. You just find something else.
Right.
And I think that, that's the balancing act, that you don't want to be tied to your schedule so rigidly, that you're sort of not, that you don't have that flexibility to adapt to changing circumstances, while at the same point not being so willy-nilly that, you're bouncing all over the place and whatever you're writing in your schedule is sort of meaningless because you never follow the schedule. So kind of finding that balance between putting enough into your schedule that things get done, but not so much that you don't have flexibility.
Yeah, it's interesting. People are chiming in here, and many of them are agreeing that taking your to-do list and transferring it to time, putting it on your calendar is definitely, and someone actually says your to-do list is your credit card of time, but your calendar is your bank account. It's where you're actually going to use time, which is sort of an interesting way to look at it. Another person says the only way she can make that work is to schedule time not to do anything so that the calendar doesn't feel, as you say, like a straitjacket, that she's got, that she's got some activities, some time that's for herself. And Maria says, leave huge blocks of free time called prosperity in her calendar. So people seem to have worked out their strategies for using their calendar effectively. Interesting. Okay, well, let's see. Is there anything else you want to add before we close? We're running out of time. This has been super, super interesting. Any suggestions for longer-term life planning, for example? I'm thinking that this is something that we often overlook when we're just focused on getting everything done every day and getting there on time.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's just a natural process that the long term gets squeezed out when we're too frantic with the immediate and the short term. So I think it's also a matter of making time to think about those long term things and to address them. And, that means making some hard choices sometimes in the moment about, what you spend your time on and what you let into your life and into your awareness, and eliminating some things so that there is some of that slack time. And so there is some of that time to sort of, reflect and pause and, go to the gym and get to bed early and just all that other kind of good stuff that we all need. And I think it's easy to kind of add in new activities and interesting things because there's a lot out there. But, more is not always better.
Right. So literally put some time in your schedule to think about longer-term planning, whatever that may be. Create goals, write things down, and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
and for some of it, for that repeating stuff, to put it in your calendar, even if it's a year away, but at least then it's down somewhere. Now, you might kind of shuffle it around as it gets closer to that time. I can't do it this week, but I'll do it next week. Fine, good enough. But at least to kind of have it down in there somewhere so that then it actually happens.
Yeah, this is a suggestion from Chris. Said, I guess Dr. Amen suggests to write down the goals you want for the major parts of your life, relationships, money, work, self, and just keep them posted or keep them on your to-do list, even if, time goes by, but they're there and you're reminded, that these things are important. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Tuckman. It's super useful. Everyone is posting that they hope we do this again soon and that it was a very, very, very useful seminar. People are wondering also if you have a website or what you recommend to take advantage of your thoughts.
Sure. So my website is adultadhdbook.com, and I've got information. I've got a bunch of information there. I've got information about upcoming stuff I'm doing, information about my books. I've got a podcast I do. I've got 100-something episodes, 1 million-something downloads. Most of them are 10 minutes long, so I respect your time. You can actually finish them in one shot, which is nice. So yeah, adultadhdbook.com is the place to get me.
Okay. adultadhdbook.com. We'll all go there. Thank you so much, and thank you, everyone. Great participation. Enjoyed it. Thanks again.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.